City Blossoms is a nonprofit that cultivates the well-being of our community through kid-driven gardens. Since 2008, City Blossoms has designed, developed, collaborated on, and provided trainings for projects throughout Washington, D.C., as well as nationwide. We strive to do that through our 5 program areas listed out here. And through these programs, we work with ages 2 through 19 to collaboratively create garden-based programs that center art, environmental education, healthy living skills, community development. And we strive to sort of take what we've learned through our work and create resources and trainings such as this so that we can hopefully share out any helpful tidbits that we've learned with other folks doing this work. And after over a decade of testing and tweaking our methods of working with youth through our Youth Entrepreneurship Cooperative program, we were able to work with the United States Botanic Garden to develop a workbook for growing a youth-led cooperative garden business. And we'll share the link to that manual in the chat so that everyone has access to it. And if anyone's interested in a physical copy, please don't hesitate to reach out because we would love to share them. All right, so the Youth Entrepreneurship Cooperative Program, which I'm going to call YEC for short. One of our youth staff members a few years back was like, that's a really long name. How about YEC? And for the purposes of time, I'm not going to repeat the name every time. So if you hear me referring to YEC, that is what that's all about. The YEC program grew out of a series of questions such as what would happen if young people were able to sort of start and manage and grow their own environmentally driven business? How would that impact community? Would the business thrive? Could running a business like that support the development of new skills that would be useful to youth in their post-high school lives? These are the questions that sort of drove us to start a seasonal project at Eastern High School, which is one of our partner schools. And through this partnership, the first group of youth that we collaborated with decided to name their business Mighty Greens. And since then, the business has grown immensely into a year-round multi-school program with hundreds of youth participating every year. But when we first started, we started pretty small. We were pretty intentional about creating a clear distinction right from the beginning between our Youth Entrepreneurship Cooperative program and the Mighty Greens business that grew out of that program. And this differentiation between the two, our goal was to really give students autonomy over the direction of their business and their brand, and create sort of a stronger feeling of ownership over the building while still allowing City Blossoms to shape and shift the YEC program model to fit how we were growing as an organization. And it made us feel like we could share the model really broadly without impacting Mighty Greens, the business. So that distinction just is sort of relevant to how we speak to our programming. Just wanted to share that at the beginning. Diving into what makes a YEC model. So what are some of the key pillars that we wanted to include? So our goal in the YEC model when we designed it was to enable participants to join a business on training wheels. So sort of using existing knowledge and infrastructure to further grow and experiment. And instead of the youth sort of creating their own business each time, the youth sort of this model allowed for them to walk into an existing structure that's already been sort of designed by previous youth and still allowed for them to make space for their new ideas, their creativity, the ability to further grow the company and sort of experiment. And our hope is that it allows for youth to sort of make mistakes, take on leadership roles, impact their community, but not having to worry about overly impacting the business in any drastic way in a negative context, so that they can make mistakes and learn from those mistakes, and not have to worry about all the things that you have to worry about if you have a fully fledged business. And one of the main goals is for this program to facilitate programming where there's a safe and engaging space where the youth can really hone their entrepreneurial, academic, and social emotional skill sets that will serve them throughout their lives. It's not necessarily intended to mean that all of the youth who participate seek out futures in farming and gardening, unless that's of interest to them, and then fully encouraged. But for them to hone skills that are really going to be useful in any context for the rest of their life. So today we are going to focus on some of those pillars, such as safe space, capacity, creating intentional and joyous culture. And even I'm going to speak to some of the things that might be helpful if you're just at the very beginning, but these are pillars that we try to continue to center and lean back on as our program grows. So hopefully it will feel relevant to folks at various stages of this type of programming. So cultivating safe space. This is one of the key components to all of our programs and especially our youth programming. Where you're holding your space is going to depend a lot on what type of space you have access to, what type of business the youth decide they want to run, when your programming is taking place, etc. So many different factors and all dependent on our communities and what that looks like. And your space may evolve. When we started, our space looked very different from what it does today. So allowing for it to grow with the youth as they grow their business. But some of the questions that we try to continue to ask ourselves is, does it feel warm and inviting? Is there an area for the group to gather together? What does storage look like? And does that storage match up with the tools and materials that we need access to? How is this space safe? And so thinking those things through, not only as a staff and with the schools that we collaborate with, but just as importantly, if not more so, encouraging the youth to really discuss how we're cultivating safe space together. Next thing, considering capacity. I know this is probably a challenge for all of us. When we first started this program, it was being run part-time by our executive director. We were much smaller staff, and now we have a full-time YAC program manager as well as a YAC fellow. Thank you, Nycko, for being here today. So thinking about that time and capacity and knowledge and people power before you let the youth get super far in their brainstorming, so that they know like what the parameters are, what you can support them in developing, and don't develop an idea that then you're like, oh, we don't have the ability to support this right now because we don't have the people power, what have you. So thinking through if there's someone at your school or your organization, depending on where you're coming from, who has the capacity to take this on. But more broadly than that, sort of thinking about your network and what kind of time commitment they might have, whether or not there's some folks in your community who might be interested in helping to hold this program with you, how you can maybe connect to already existing youth-focused programs, or connect to a nearby business who might be interested in sort of mentoring the youth or sharing some of their expertise. And then thinking about if you have maybe some initial seed money or initial resources that that the youth can use to sort of get their business started. So those are some of the constraints that we tried to think about when we were getting started, and that might be helpful to someone starting or changing their programming. And then finally, the third sort of key pillar is creating an intentional and joyous culture. We're convinced that this is one of the most important pillars of a program like YEC, that it needs to have sort of an established culture that supports self-expression and community building. So no matter what your youth-led business is focused on or doing, the community that you create is going to be key to recruitment, to retention, to growth, and to building a space that sort of encourages exploration and knowledge sharing and relationship building and trust and laughter, all the things that keep us coming back. So this probably feels super obvious to all of us. I imagine that most of us want to create this kind of space, but I think it's a good question to continue asking ourselves, even if you're further along in having developed your program. How are you making sure this stays central to your youth-led business? So some of the things that we've tended to lean into are having music. The Mighty Greens youth every year usually build out a collective playlist that they can add to that we always have playing. We create a lot of art together that represents our spaces, our business. We have community meals usually about once a month. So, when you eat together, that's a key way to build those relationships, laugh, enjoy time together. And finally, celebrations as well. This photo actually is from our annual Basil Bonanza, which is a basil themed potluck that is sort of a celebration that rounds off summer programming with Mighty Greens youth staff. So those are just a few of the ways, and I think continuing to ask yourselves how that's being built out and make sure that the youth are having that conversation is super important. Oops. And I think we are missing a slide or two. Sorry about that. All right. So building a program like this takes time. We've been at this for about 12 years. So we've learned a lot in this time. I think that thinking about it in steps has been really helpful and not trying to do it all at once. But these are some of the pieces that we want to talk through that might be helpful as we think through building out a program like this. So first off, establishing partnerships. I think that establishing partnerships both takes a lot of time, but can also help to make this work a little bit easier, and also develops a really strong network of people that are invested in the project, and is really key to sort of the longevity of a program like this, as well as creating a network of folks that your youth staff can really lean into. And then uniting superpowers and key sort of stakeholders and roles. When it comes to stakeholders, the most obvious ones are the youth. After all, you really can't have a youth-led business if there are no youth there to direct it and run it. They're the drivers, and through their participation in a business like that, they're going to really become the experts of their craft, from production all the way through the sale of their products. In addition to making like key business decisions and playing a really key role in maintaining safe space. So it's really important to make sure that they're a part of building out a program like this right from the get-go, so that they can make sure that it fits with what the youth want. Another key stakeholder is some sort of program manager for that. For us, that looks one way. For another organization, that's going to look very different. But having one or two people that serve as sort of the point people in supporting and facilitating programming, especially as you get your program started, I think that's super important. And we've found this to be a balance between supporting the youth and making sure that we're not overshadowing youth leadership. And so one of the ways that our program manager sort of ensures that happens is sort of asking a lot of questions of the youth, especially if it's a new group of youth who are just starting out in the business, to help them think critically and ultimately lead them to sort of thinking a bit more deeply about any decisions they make around the business, and reach more informed conclusions and conclusions that work for the group as a whole overall. And then finally, school stakeholders. I know some of you may or may not be working with schools, but if you're trying to connect with youth, often connecting with schools on some level is super helpful. So for us, that's looked like a really wide range of people, but guidance counselors, facilities personnel, administration, educators, anyone who is excited and supportive of the program. And then finally, external community members as well, to make sure that we are connecting beyond the school walls and creating that deep network of folks with different superpowers. And then as you build your program, thinking about sustainability and how you can weave in sustainability right from the start. So at City Blossoms, we call this our Bubba plan, or beamed up by aliens. This Bubba plan is sort of a paper trail of how to pass this program on beyond you if you were to disappear tomorrow and get beamed up by aliens. So how is that institutional knowledge captured and shared with future folks who are running this program? So maybe like planting plans, a rough calendar of programming, key contacts, a list of vendors from where you source different materials. And our Mighty Greens as a business also has one that records sort of their product recipes and dates for seedling sales and things like that, so that their product can stay consistent. And so definitely encourage folks to do that from as soon as they have the capacity to at the beginning. All right. And also thinking about recruitment. So we've talked a lot about some of the basics here. And I think that involving youth in the program, even if you're just at the very beginning stage, is super important. And for us, that has looked like creating a program with the least number of barriers to entry possible. I think it looks different for everyone. For us, that's meant sort of drop-in programming after school that allows for students other commitments and responsibilities that we're sort of competing with to not prevent them from being engaged in the program when they have time and space to do so. And so that's worked really well for us. But I think everyone's programs and communities looks different, and you kind of have to figure that out for yourselves. But the best way to do that is to talk to the youth who are potentially going to be in your program. And on that note, I'm actually going to pass this off because I want to make sure we've got enough time to hear from Nycko. I had the pleasure of meeting Nycko, I think, as a freshman in high school, and I'm really excited to hear more from him. He was a Mighty Greens youth staff member, I think, from 2018 to 2020 or 2021. and he is now our Youth Entrepreneurship Cooperative Fellow. So I'm going to pass it to Nycko so that he can share about both his experience as a fellow and running the programming, as well as a participant when he was a youth staff member running the business. So Nycko, it's all yours.
Hi, I'm Nycko. I worked with Brighty Greens all throughout my high school experience with Eastern, and I've enjoyed every single moment of it. It's one of the reasons why I came back as a fellow. I wanted to continue that experience. Um, Today, we're going to kind of discuss the history of me just going from being a youth staff to transitioning to a fellow. And also, we're going to go over just a year of a Mighty Greens member from both angles. So starting off, Mighty Greens is a youth created and driven business that grew from City Blossoms Youth Entrepreneurship Cooperative program. Their mission is to increase the accessibility to healthy food to their community. What originally brought me really was that I could become more emotionally vulnerable to be a part of the community and to really start that business element of things. In school, every day, I will just leave and go home immediately. I never attempted to make any meaningful relationships with anyone. I only wanted to just get my education and be done with school. But after joining, I was able to really be myself. I felt like I was heard, and I started to talk a lot more and express myself. And through that, I've made many meaningful relationships with Willa, with um, Stephanie, with a lot of the students at both schools now. So it helped me grow as an individual and some of the skills that I've developed, like what I'm doing right now, my presentation skills, voicing my opinion, and gardening itself developed additionally. Um, Going into my YEC fellowship, like the facilitator side of things, um, some of the ways that some of the thoughts that I had to go into was determining how much am I supposed to do and how much is a youth supposed to do, and setting fine lines of boundaries. Because at the end of the day, this is youth led. That means that youth have to be the people doing majority of the processes. So for me, this came down to establishing community agreements. A community agreement is basically a mutual understanding or a set of expectations that all community members have to abide by, and setting leadership roles for the youth. And over the summer, we've had three, which were our business bloomers. They've managed the inventory, they led the market days, and really were our sales managers. We had our Insta gardeners. They were the people who were community and organization outreach. They were regulating brand recognition and creating surveys to get communities' feedbacks and also seed of action. They would look up current events about food and environmental justice and create collaborative activities to engage communities and their members with those current events. Also, um, just on the back end, as now my fellowship role, I would support my YEC manager, Stephanie Solis, right now with the behind the scenes support. So this would be market day coordination, um, is having an, I'm sorry, seedling sales for emails, and then doing follow up emails with some of the people we'll be working with, and creating a survey um, to get feedback from the community members to give with back to the youth. Uh, just to go over a year of Mighty Greens, really, we have 3 seasons. We have our spring, summer, and fall season. Usually during winter, we wouldn't do much because it's too cold to work, and we wouldn't want to put the youth through that. So during our spring, we have our seedling sales. We start shortly before spring, And over the course of spring, we'll continue growing seeds. But really, we have like around 8,000 to 10,000 seedlings being made during this time. It's one of our most labor intensive moments. And this is the period of time where we really sell the most, that is not our value added products. Anything that isn't sold during this time at the two schools that we work at, which is Eastern and Cardozo, will be donated to either organizations, community centers, or just donation centers in general. We'll have our sidewalk sale going at one of the school locations. Usually, this is like a market day setup, but on a side of a school. And we'll be selling things like our value added products or produce that we collected from the garden. So this can consist of like our Swiss chard, our kale, or even herbs that we have, like our chocolate mint, rosemary, and thyme. We'll have skill shares too, which is like just tabling at certain events. So usually each year we'll go to Rooting DC, and sometimes we'll have presentations going on to just explain what we do over a course of a year, how other people can replicate it. Basically what I'm doing right now. Over the summer, there's a program called the Youth Entrepreneurship Program, which is short for like SYEP. It's a government-funded employment program for youth. Mighty Greens hosts a job with SYEP, so the youth have the opportunity to continue their business over the summer. We have summer markets at farmers markets where they have their tabling events, such as the picture you see there, where we sell our value-added products, such as our chive blossoms, our sometimes whipped body butters, herb salts, and many of the produce that we grew inside of the garden. So again, with the Swiss chard, collard greens, we sell basil and a few others. To really push for the creativity side, we have our signage project. We have the youth decide how many signs they would like to make, what colors they would like to choose. We really have this be multiple conversations, multiple meetings where we're really deciding on what elements they want. And we, on the back end, buy those for them so then they can, over the summer, continue the process. For cooking, we'll have our community meals, like Willa said earlier, where the youth will decide on the recipes that they would like to have at the start of the summer. And each week we'll have a cook day on Friday or Thursday, one of the two, where the youth will make the meal from start to finish, make any alterations that they feel is necessary, and we'll sit down and eat all of it together and give feedback with one another. It's a nice way to really be in present moment with them, to really talk it out and to really set goals for like the future of things like how did the week go or what are we looking to do next week, and then that will lead into some of our professional development, which is our field trips and or having someone come in and giving a presentation about some information that they know. This can be from like different career paths, the knowledge that they have, and this gives the youth a chance to have hands-on experience in those fields. For fall, we usually start to slow things down because there's not a lot more to do because the weather's starting to get cold. It's hard, we can't really grow any plants, and it's going to be time for things to start being harvested, just the last harvest. So we established our community supported agriculture, which is CSA for short, with the schools or community members. We continue the sidewalk sales at one of the school locations just so we can get everything out of the garden, make sure it has a home, it's being eaten, and we're not contributing to like a lot of food waste. And we start to make our products for the holiday markets. Usually, like before, we have our whipped body butters, we have our herb salts, we have the teas and chives. And during the holiday market, this is when we have the most amount of money being made for our value added products. So we really do push on the product making days to make sure we have enough of everything. Just recently, actually, we had the youth sit down and do an inventory of all the items they had, so then we can see what items we actually need to get so we can have a successful holiday market. And after everything is done, we do a sweep of the garden. We cut everything down that needs to be cut down. We pack up all of the rosemary so it can survive the winter, or any plants that need help surviving the winter. And then we close out for the year. So I just want to say thank you for having me as your speaker today. And I hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much, Will and Nycko. It was so exciting to hear about the work that you've been doing with Mighty Greens over the years. I'm going to invite those who have questions to feel free to ask those questions in the chat, thinking about some of the things maybe that resonated with you about what Willa and Nycko have presented, and we will do a little bit of moderated Q&A and ask them a little bit more about some of the areas that were of interest to you. So I'll start out with a few questions. I'm wondering about setting up partnerships. Willa, you talked about that a little bit. What, if you could recall, it might have been a while ago, what were some of those first steps of setting up the partnerships with the schools that you work with? And sort of what was your process of finding out like who may be interested in engaging in this kind of work with City Blossoms?
Yeah, happy to speak to that to the best of my ability. I was an intern when we started our partnership with Eastern, so I was less on the ground with some of it, but we typically wait to be invited into a space, so not making any assumptions about whether or not a school wants to partner with us. Someone reached out to us from Eastern High School. They had sort of a small garden that someone had built, but didn't create any sort of infrastructure around continuing to maintain it or have programming in it. And they reached out to us to see if we would be interested in partnering. And I think at the beginning, it was a lot of just figuring out who was interested on the ground, and where it made sense to connect in. In DC schools, you have to have a certain number of community service hours to graduate from high school. And so one of the ways that we first connected in and got youth to come out to this space was connecting with a few advisory groups from the school and letting youth know that this was a space they could get their community service hours. And that's how we sort of built out our initial outreach and connected with some of the youth who really set the groundwork for starting these businesses. And then similarly, when we started with our second partner school, they reached out to us to see if they could also join this program, and that's how we got started with them. Hopefully that answers it. Feel free to ask me further questions if I missed anything.
Great, that's helpful, thanks. There was a follow-up question. Somebody asked about how many students do you think is needed to start a quality program?
I'm always of a mind of like whoever shows up to your party is your party. So I don't know that I think there's like a set number, but I think having a core group of youth who are committed is really helpful in having like a broad range of opinions that are shared. Nycko, do you want to share anything on that in terms of the number of youth that you thought was helpful to have at programming days?
So usually at programming days, I can say that we have 5 core members for both schools. Usually it fluctuates because people have jobs outside of the gardening club, Mighty Greens, and also they have school and everything else to attend to. So sometimes they just don't have the opportunities to come as much as they'd like. So we meet them where they are a lot of the time. And if they are with us that day, then we will love to work with them. But I can say that around 5 youth will help us. Eastern is a larger space, so technically around 7 to 8 youth will be a nice size to get a lot of the work done, such as weeding, watering, and just overall maintenance in general. But 5 core members that you can rely on would be really nice.
And we have anywhere from like 5 to 25 youth who are showing up on like a daily basis at both of our programs. So it really,
Yeah.
we never know how many folks are going to show up. And that's kind of how we've built the program out, but different for everyone.
Thank you. We have a question about how long do the students tend to participate, or sort of what is the range that maybe you see when you're thinking about meeting people where they are, and also doing sort of the drop-in sort of style that you talked about.
I can speak a little bit more on that. So usually we're at the schools for about 2.5 hours. We are there from 4:30 to 6 o'clock. So that's where we really meet them where they're at. And we are at the schools, both, well, one of the schools for 2 days out of the week. So for Cardozo, we're there on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. At Eastern, we're there Thursdays and Fridays. If the school coordinators are there in the garden a little longer, then they can have community service hours given to them by the school coordinator. But we are only there 2 days out of the week during those times. We do have other events such as the tabling events what may happen on the weekend where the youth can come to, but usually it is on their initiative to be there, and we give them that time and space.
Great. And yeah, just in case this is helpful, I think we also see youth who come back year after year or like can't show up for a fall because they have to care for a younger sibling, but in the spring they can come back. And so I'd say some youth only come for maybe a year when they have space for it, and other youth come throughout high school. So starting as freshmen all the way through senior year, and then, bring families back to City Blossom celebrations or want to come back and visit their school garden. So I'd say we typically have a core group of youth who are just like very committed to the business and continue to come back year after year. Even if they're out of high school, they figure out ways to reconnect with the youth who are currently in the program.
Thank you. We had a question about the process of building the student team. Someone was asking, do you establish the team at the beginning of the season or allow folks to join mid-season? And you touched on that a little bit. Sometimes people may not be able to be there for part of it, but maybe you want to elaborate a little bit about sort of how do you communicate that open invitation throughout the year and invite folks in on sort of that rolling basis? What's that process of building the team look like?
Yeah, you can join on the last day of a fall market if you want. There's no hard or fast rule. It's just always open to join and come in. And I think one of the things that I always love about visiting programming is watching some of the youth who have been coming every day all year welcome a new youth staff member into the fold, even if it's like later in the season, and getting to see that peer-to-peer like mentorship. So yeah, you can enter whenever, except for the summer programming is a little bit more set in stone because it's through a government program that doesn't have the ability to let people just do drop-in hours. And in terms of communication, I can let Nycko speak to that further. A lot of it is like word of mouth from the youth. Like a youth staff member will bring a friend, and they'll stick around for 30 minutes and realize that this is something they're really interested in, and then start coming back. But Nycko, I feel like you're more on the day-to-day and probably have more to add to that.
Yeah, it is really much word of mouth. I did talk to some of the school members. One of them, there's TVs inside of the school which just talk about current events. I've talked with one of the people there and was able to put a flyer up. But outside of that, we touch with our school coordinators. During the school day, they try to invoke like nice feelings for people to come to the garden, to really experience things, to get their community service hours. We try our best to like play music, to have many like meals to really encourage people to come in. Sometimes we have tablings like right outside of the garden door where we give lemonade out. So then people are more aware of the gardens being there, Mighty Greens working there, and they might want to come by and see what's happening. Also, students can come throughout the whole entire year, but since this is a for-profit business, Mighty Greens is for profit, it's incentivized that meet they meet a certain amount of hours to be eligible of getting paid. So right now, I believe it's around 25 to 30 hours. So youth have to work that many hours so then they can be eligible of getting a check. But other than that, they're free to come anytime. We are more than welcome. And it's like what Willa said, it's a really empowering moment where new youth come inside and they're treated as if they were there the whole entire year. Their voice is always heard. They feel as though they have a say. And we see them come back next year bringing their friends. So it is a nice experience, and I'm really happy to be able to provide that for them.
Thanks, Nycko. And we're getting some nice comments in the chat around loving the flexibility, but also allowing for longevity, but not requiring it in the program. So it's a really neat model to see. Nycko, you mentioned a little bit about the financial piece and the being a little bit incentivized to come more frequently on that front. And somebody was wondering about financial literacy, and is that a component of the program? And how do you speak about that and learn about that with youth?
We partner with, I believe they're called Banking on DC. They come by every summer and give a financial literacy class for the youth. And throughout the school year, we encourage the youth who are over the summer to give a lesson on financial literacy. And we'll back that up by actually having like a PowerPoint or slides or just having a whole discussion based around financial literacy. We've also had many times where we have data spreadsheets given, we'll have them do budget management and really push them in the business aspect where they're not only learning about these words, but they're learning how they're implied inside of their daily lives inside of this business.
Thank you. And we had one clarifying question. Somebody asked, did you mean that 25 hours per week means you get paid? Can you speak again about that 25 hours that you mentioned?
Yeah, we can.
Sorry, I
Oh,
meant 25 hours. Oh, sorry. 25 hours over the whole entire school year. We touched a bit on it, but because the youth have to maintain their grades, they have a life, or they have jobs, they're not able to always be there. So we're not only thinking about ways that we can give everyone equal say and equal part, but also ways so we can be more equitable to their life and their needs. And we would take um, all of the hours that each youth makes and look at them, and then we'll ask the youth, what is the minimum amount of hours do you guys feel is appropriate? Um, do they feel is warranted of pay? And from there, after they make the decision, we enact on it.
And just to add on,
Yeah,
because
go
this
ahead.
might have been confusing, in the summer, the youth who are with us work 25 hours per week through the Student Youth Employment program in DC, and they get paid hourly for that time. Whereas during the school year, it's more of like a stipend that gets paid out based on profits.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying. We have a couple of questions about at the organizational level, how is this work funded? So somebody had asked, how did you get funding to begin, and how much money do you think you need to begin? And then someone else asked, do the products you sell fund the program? So if you could speak a little bit at the organizational level and what the funding structure looks like.
Yeah, happily. So we try to maintain a pretty diverse stream of funding. We officially came about in 2008 in the midst of what the financial state of this country looked like. So right from the beginning, we felt it was super important to have a lot of different funding sources and not be funded by one specific funder. We have some combination of foundations and trusts, local government grants, consulting revenue, and individual and business donors that make up our funding. In terms of how much money you need to get started, when we started, it was a very small project. The youth were originally sort of selling basil for a Mother's Day sale at Eastern. And that's how we originally tested the waters. There wasn't, a huge amount of investment that needed to happen for that. It was like soil and seeds, which we probably got for free. And so a lot of our materials were sort of sourced from companies that were willing to give donations. I think the biggest thing there was just our time, like our staff time. And we were fortunate enough to have grants that we were able to have our City Blossom staff join at the school to help build this program out. But I think you can scale your project to a size that fits your current budget and grow the program as you think you have more financial and time capacity. Was there any other piece of that question that I missed? There are a couple in there.
Yeah, I think you got it. Thank you. Here's a little bit of a switching gears question, but one that's interesting to speak to. Someone was asking about the garden space that the students use and interested to know how big is that space and sort of if you could describe it a little bit.
I can. So Cardozo and Eastern, two totally different schools. Most of Cardozo's like plot is inside of raised beds, while at Eastern we do have the ground to really work with. So Eastern we have a lot more playroom. It's a lot bigger. I'll say like if you put um all of Cardozo's boxes together, it will be like 3 to 4 times more space at Eastern than at Cardozo. So usually at Eastern, we'll need a lot more maintenance done because of the weeding and everything. I can't give you like actual dimensions as of right now, but I can look them up at the back end of things to tell you just how big both schools are. But really, Eastern is where we're getting most of our produce from because of just the sheer size and the most bulk that we can get out of it.
Thank you. A couple more questions about garden space. Someone asked about soil testing. Do you know if if you kind of went through that soil testing process at those sites and how you went about that?
Yeah, we always get soil tested if we're going to be doing or we just always test soil when we're starting out a project, especially if we're doing in-ground beds. So we sent our soil away at both sites for a soil test, as I'm sure with many schools across the country. DC schools have had a lot of construction near them, so we found it particularly important to make sure that soil is tested since we're growing edible things that are not only being shared by the youth, but the broader community. And if anyone needs resources on that, I'm happy to share out. If you send me an email, I can share out the resources we used. And I'm guessing that other folks nearby extension offices have really fantastic resources.
Perfect. Thank you. Someone was asking about like in the situation of the two schools you described, they already had space for gardening. Have you encountered any situations or have thoughts about what if that's not the case? Have you seen like interesting collaborations around like use of space to do a program like this when the school itself or the youth organization didn't have its own space?
Yeah, definitely. We were very fortunate in that most of the most of the schools in most of the DCPS high schools that have been around for a while have greenhouses that have been a part of their structure for quite some time. And so we have access to 2 greenhouses, which we're very, very fortunate for. I think if you don't have access to space, it might change what type of business you want to run with your youth. So maybe it's like exploring, like if you only have a small space, maybe you focus less on vegetable production and more on herb production or something like that. Or maybe you have a totally different business. So thinking about what resources you have readily at hand and building out space from there. I think also taking stock of other projects that are already happening that have gardens that you might be able to plug into, and thinking through what collaboration could look like. I know we have a partnership with another organization that does more production farming, but we're able to have a youth farm at that farm because they're interested in sort of creating a holistic experience where people can both see where their food is grown and have access to sort of youth-based programming. So I think making sure you know what's happening around you and what our potential collaborations can be really useful.
Thank you. And we're just about at the end of our Q&A portion here, but I'll end with one. Nycko, you mentioned something really interesting about sort of how do you think about like how much you're supposed to do versus how much do the youth do? And I'm wondering your thoughts about like how do you set up expectations at the beginning that this work really is intended to be youth-led, and how do you sort of initiate those conversations so that's the feeling of your program?
Ways that we've done that is really by first establishing a community agreement. Um, it's so important that we do that because it shows them right away that their voice matters and that it's going to carry on throughout the whole entire program. Even with new students who just first come into the program, they have a say inside of the community agreements. We ask them, do they agree with them? What do they not agree with? What would they like to change? And then we bring that to a larger conversation. From there, then we start to slowly introduce all of the other roles that they'll have their say inside of. And through that process, we slowly get them like accustomed to having a voice, accustomed to being in that role. I feel like no one should be thrown inside of a leadership role without knowing what it entails. So we really want to pace ourselves and giving them those leadership roles, making sure they feel as though they have the equipment, they have the resources and knowledge to run the business appropriately.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks so much, Willa and Nycko, for your presentations and for elaborating a bit through this Q&A. It's been really great to hear from both of you and learn from your wisdom and experience doing this kind of work.